Greetings, Inquisitors. Welcome to the Holocron. This is the 2023 Gear Efficiency Guide for Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. Just about anyone can bring a character to 7 stars and put a relic on them in this game, but most people want to know, did I do that the best way possible? Is there a way to make it more efficient? Can I make it go faster? So that's what we're out to answer today in this Holocron. We're going to try to achieve the maximum efficiency for building characters all the way from nothing to 7 stars, level 85, gear them up, use all the energy, events, shop, currency, and crystals to get the maximum character development within a certain period of time. This path is going to take us a while to explain. We've got a lot to go through. First of all, we have to establish a method for analyzing all the gear so that we can try to make a system that's going to make it as efficient as possible. We're going to have to set a basis for income, decide where we are in the game, what we want to represent. Then we're going to have to determine the shortest sustainable relic cycle. And by sustainable, I mean the amount of time that it takes to relic a character, where you can do it that way over and over and over again for completing journeys and continuing progress in your account. We're going to go through in detail the acquisition of all of the resource limited pieces. So gear piece by gear piece, signal data, relic scavenged materials, all of it. We're going to go through all of it bit by bit, where we're going to get it, how we're going to get it, how much we need, and make sure that we can fit that within our sustainable cycle. Then we're going to flip it around and we're going to do the breakdown the other way. Once we've determined where we're going to get all this gear, we're going to put it all together so that for each shop, we determine what we need out of those shops. We'll talk about energy use, what we need out of each energy type every day. And then we'll talk about crystal use as well. And then at the end, we'll have some disclaimers and conclusions to wrap it all up. In order to get a method, what I've done is I want to establish a large pool of characters, and I want it to be relevant journeys. So let's say more modern stuff that takes a lot of kairos and higher relics to complete the journeys. And we're going to create a massive pool of gear, relic materials, signal data, all of that, based on all of these characters. Then we're going to establish a method to match the income, the shop purchases, and rewards to generate a baseline of free gear. And then we're going to have to figure out shop purchases, farming, and all the relic timing to determine how to match up resources that we can spend in the game. And then we'll continue to try to make that smaller and smaller until we can't figure out a way to make the cycle go any faster. So my baseline for this was to build the Executor journey. Of course, that includes Beskar Armor Mando, so we threw those characters in, even though all of them don't have to go to relics. SLKR, then Jedi Knight Luke into Jabba the Hutt, and Profundity, just to add in a journey with some more high relic requirements. And then you will want other relics that aren't just part of these 4 journeys, another relic team. So we picked about 10 other high relic characters, newer characters that take a lot of chirotech on them. And we made a total pool of 63 relic characters. So basically 2 massive fleets, SLKR and Jabba the Hutt, as the big journeys. And for income, we established kind of a mid-game income. I didn't put fleet on here, and we have to place top 5 in fleet. So for fleet, I assumed 5th place every day for 300 crystals. Crate raid, I put it at the 25 million loot box with a 1.7 personal contribution. If you do this build and you get Jabba the Hutt, for sure you will exceed the 1.7 personal contribution, and you should be able to get into a guild that's getting far better than 25 million loot box. But I did want to keep it relevant for earlier game players who may not have the Jabba the Hutt journey completed or intend to complete it. So I made the goals more modest there. And that crate raid makes a huge impact on the overall timing of the relic cycles. So I think this is a midpoint where you could say a lot of mid-game characters are beyond this. Some are not. So it's kind of a midpoint. For hard conquest, we suggest we're going to get to box 5, and I did include that gear from the $10 pass and 10 refreshes per week. So relatively modest refresh scheme, $10 pass, and only push into box 5. Part of the reason for that is we just don't have the crystals to do a lot of refreshes and go for box 6 or box 7. So again, if you get higher boxes in Conquest or you're willing to do more refreshes there's a possibility to increase your income. For Grand Arena, we wanted to set, I actually set it to Kyber 5 without realizing it. So basically, it's somewhere between Erodium 2 and Kyber 4, because obviously if you're in Kyber 5, you get pushed back down to Erodium, pushed back up to Kyber. So it's somewhere in that range, and I did, for the rewards, I did a 50% win rate. So 1 and 2 1 week, and 2 and 1 the next week, and just alternating like that. Of course, with the every 4th week off, but the final payout at the end. So that's basically the scheme. Territory Wars, we went with something like a 300 million galactic power guild and a 50% win rate. For territory battles, I just did 20-star payout in ROTE. We did assume that we're going to have 6 battles at Challenge Tier 1 for the Assault Battle events, and at least 4 of those at Challenge Tier 2. For the Galactic Challenges, we just assume we're going to get Box 8 every time. Again, a lot of people are going to be getting Box 9, Box 10. So, again, it's just meant to be an average for a mid-game player, and I think a lot of people can do better than this. And then we will have as a baseline assumption that we're going to spend 3 refreshes on each energy type every day, that being the light and dark energy, Cantina, fleet, and mod energy. It's just pretty much standard that we're going to do those 3 refreshes every day no matter what. To establish a timeline, again, we had 2 Galactic Legends in this journey. We have ticket farming periods that are going to take place where we probably will be less focused on building toward relic characters and more focused on just getting our Galactic Legend gear and tickets and everything. So that was in the cycle at first. And I had about an 8.6 days cycle per relic that was pretty sustainable. Then I kind of figured out that even though these were both dark side GLs, which would throw us off of Cairo farming, we could simply, during the time that we're farming those GL tickets, we could switch to farming the Cairo computers instead of the Cairo shock prods. It's not as efficient for account building, but that cut it down to about 7.6 days, which was looking at 68 weeks. And that's for the 2 big Galactic Legend ships and 2 Galactic Legend characters and 10 extra relics to round out your fleets and teams. So 68 weeks seemed pretty aggressive for that. But when I went back and I looked at the signal data, assuming 3 Cantina refreshes every day, there was still room to go. We were at 68% of the signal data being used for Cantina energy being used for signal data, which meant that I had a lot more room to push because we didn't need that much Cantina energy for characters. So seemed like an opportunity to push even further. So then I cut it back down and I optimized based on the Cantina energy to where we're using 90% of our Cantina energy on those signal data. And that was the lowest sustainable solution that I could achieve. And it did require using crystals. And the crystals in the account that we get that are beyond daily refreshes, if we use them all just for making relics and we don't use them for any, let's say, proving ground refreshes or other things, then that's needed for this cycle. So crystals become a currency that we have to use to maintain the 6.5 days per relic. The bottleneck resource becomes BRONZIUM wiring. It's going at a rate where you can barely keep up with the BRONZIUM wiring at the same level if we do pretty much everything in the account to build BRONZIUM wiring. We'll talk about that. So I'm going to present this conclusion as the optimal gear strategy. I can't find a way to go faster, and it does look like this is pretty sustainable. Now, players with higher income or later in the game, especially people who are doing much better in the crate raid, people who are getting first place in fleet every day, higher GAC placement, they definitely can go faster. However, because of this BRONZIUM wiring and signal data bottleneck, it really doesn't go much faster than the 6.5 days. It makes it easier for a lot of the other gear, makes it easier especially for the higher level relic scavenged materials. But even end game accounts with a lot more income don't get to do much better than this, simply because of the bottleneck on BRONZIUM wiring, and it becomes hard to break. So gear specific, let's cover everything that we need to solve with purchases and farming. We did do relic scraps and all of the stuff for that, so that'll be in this. Be patient. We'll get to that at the end. We will talk about those infamous BRONZIUM wirings when we get to it. And then I'll present it again as a per resource assessment to bring it together. So establishing the signal data pool. If we have Cantina energy refreshing at 120 per day, which as long as we don't let it max out, we'll get that for free. We can pick up 45 energy for free once a day, and we can do 3 refreshes for a total of 360 more. So it's 525 Cantina energy per day that we have access to. That gives us 215,000 energy over a 58.5 week period, for a total of 13,400 runs on the Cantina at the signal data level. And this 58.5 weeks represents 63 characters at 6.5 days each. So if we plug those numbers in and we try to work it all out, fragmented signal data, we do about 4,200 runs plus events. Incomplete signal data, we need 4,750 runs plus conquest, purchases, and events. And flawed signal data, we need 2,800 runs plus conquest, purchases, and events. And that leaves us 11% of our potential Cantina energy for characters. It's a little less than what we need to build everything in this journey, but it's close. It puts us relatively on track. Now, for early game players, you will not be able to sustain this rate of refresh out of the Cantina. Most new players can't achieve maximum fleet placement every day, and that means they won't get all the crystals for all the refreshes every day until they get higher fleet placement and higher GAC placement. So it just makes everything take a little bit longer. When the signal data is a bottleneck, then that determines your timeline. So a newer player definitely is going to be a longer timeline for a sustainable cycle. But as your account develops, you will manage to get to this point eventually. The best use for purchased crystals in the early game is just to make sure that you get all these refreshes, and I can't state strongly enough how much difference it makes to get these Cantina refreshes every day, all the time, right from the start of your account. If a newer player does buy crystals and just uses them to make sure we get these Cantina refreshes every day, it makes a huge difference in how fast we get those initial characters in the account and free that energy up to just farm all the signal data that we need for relics. Okay, so that's the tightest timeline that we can achieve, this 6.5 days. We run it out, we find out that we can get enough signal data as long as we can balance and juggle between signal data and characters, that we are on track, and that kind of sets our timeline and doesn't let us go much below that 6.5 days. I'm going to you're going to see RT in this a lot. You're going to see M1 RT, M2 RT, M3 RT, and that's Mark 1 raid token, Mark 2 raid token, and Mark 3 raid token, and I just needed an abbreviation to keep those things short. So we're going to establish that pool, and again, every 3 days, we're going to complete the raid with a 25 million box and that 1.7 million personal participation. So that's 8475 of the Mark 1, 578,000 for the life of the journey, 5160 Mark II, so 352,000 for the life of the journey, and only 750 of the Mark III raid tokens, so 51K overall. And you'll see later on how much of a limiting factor that is and how big of a deal it is if you can even just say get the next box or the next 2 boxes up on the Mark III raid tokens. The whole thing becomes so much easier and less expensive. Gives you more options. It is almost impossible to do these raids every 3 days without missing a day here and there. But if everyone's contributing all their tickets every day, it does come close. So again, there's going to be some variability. I built Jabba the Hutt as part of this journey. Once you do that, you'll be far ahead on the personal track. So I figure overall, it'll balance out in the end, and this is a reasonable representation of what you could pull down. Carbontes. First gear piece we need to talk about, Mark III Carbonite sensor array. It's still a showstopper in the sense that it's the most needed piece of gear in the entire data set. 15,050 Carbonates needed. Events and daily challenges actually give a good chunk of what's needed. But even if we bought 125 a week with the Mark I raid token, so we just said, okay, what if we made one purchase every week of 125? That would take 161,000 Mark I raid token over the course of 58.5 weeks. And we can't buy all of our Carbontes here because we do need to leave these Mark I raid tokens free for other gear. And in order to fit in all of that other gear plus the credit purchases that we need to buy with Mark I raid tokens, the balance that I had to strike was to buy 125 of these per week. And that does leave 34 per week that we have to acquire by other means. So we still need to use guild tokens, guild event tokens, maybe shard shop currency. We need to farm hard nodes that have Carbontes on them at some point, or maybe just make more purchases with the Mark I raid tokens if we have to. But at the end of the day, we're going to schedule to do 125 of these per week, and we're going to pick up some purchases of the Carbontes or farming of them elsewhere. And you can't say, well, I'll just get those 35 from events, because I have averaged in event loot across all the events. Maybe I missed something, but it's all in there, and it's all already subtracted off a huge chunk of that 15,000. So if we look at our total pool of the Mark I raid token, we're going to have 578,000 over the course of the entire time span. And if we subtract off the 161 that we're going to spend on Carbontes, that puts us at 418,000 remaining. The Kyrotech Shock Prod, this is obviously, the Kyrotech is a big bottleneck for everybody. And it will continue to be, and we're going to have to solve it by farming Kyro pretty much all the time. So if you do all of the daily objectives, you get like 3 Kyro every day, and it could be Kyro Shock Prod or Kyro Computer or whatever. You get some from events, from Conquest, Territory Wars, Territory Battles. If I take all of that together, we still have 4,094 Kyro Shock Prod left to obtain. We're going to make no purchases from the shop. Farming Kyrotech Shock Prod gets us a material that's very good for building BRONZIUM wiring. As we've already discussed, BRONZIUM wiring is the ultimate bottleneck for your relic cycles, so you have to farm every shock prod that you need for your account, more or less. You either have to get it from the events, or anything that you don't get as free loot from events, you have to farm, just to keep pushing that BRONZIUM wiring as hard as possible. So just with that many Kyros, you have to spend 360 energy per day, every day, for the entire life of this journey in order to get enough Kyro to cover it. So if your total energy, light and dark side energy per day is 240, you get 135 free energy and 360 from 3 refreshes. That's 735 total energy for the day. You subtract off the 360 that we have to spend just on these Kyro runs. And that leaves you 375 energy for hard farms and shard collection, which means that on average you can run somewhere between 3 and 4 hard nodes at any given time. Again, this is a mid-game progression. So early game, obviously you got to collect more shards, probably 6 hard farms at a time, a little less Cairo, but that's okay. Mid-game players for a particular journey, sometimes a whole journey only needs 2 or 3 characters, or let's say like 2 characters and 2 ships. So we could often be farming just 4 hard nodes for what we're working on, and that's the strategy here. We really need to spend everything else on Cairo. For the Chirotech computer, the other half of the Chirotech pair, we need less of these. So what we're going to do, after the events, all of the different rewards that we can get, we still need 46 per week of these. And we're going to spend our guild event token 3 buying Chirotech computers. We're going to spend Grand Arena currency buying Chirotech computers. And if we could get, a couple purchases in here for 8 out of the GAC store, it takes longer than you think to buy 46 of these things out of the shops. It's really quite a few purchases. So we spend to get 3, we spend the Grand Arena currency, and we still have a few left over to buy, and we can use the guild event tokens too, but it doesn't take that much of our guild event token 2 at this point, because we will have most of them bought with the get 3 and the GAC currency. It leaves about 74% of your get 2 for other stuff, and we're going to have a heavy focus on buying injector parts. Speaking of which, 3 injector parts: the handle salvage, the cell salvage, and the head salvage. The handle and the cell are used pretty heavily, about twice as much each as compared to the injector head salvage. So over time, the head salvage will take care of itself, or you may even build up a little bit of it. But the handle salvage and the injector cell salvage, you will end up running short on those, even with 6 assault battles at challenge tier 1 helping you get those pieces. You'll still run out of. So our baseline income is going to be set at that 6 assault battles completing at challenge tier 1. We're going to have some conquest rewards, and we're going to buy some from the Wandering Scavenger. That's still going to leave 535 each of the handle and the cell that we need for all of these characters put together. 67 purchases of 8 each required for each part, for a total of 134 purchases, and over 58.5 weeks, that's 2.3 purchases per week. 2,116 get 2 per week, and that really is most of your guild event 2 tokens. We had 74% of our get 2 available, so 10% of our get 2 could be flexible. We could use it for more Kairos or more injectors depending on how things work out. But basically, if that's all you buy with your guild event 2 tokens, then you'll be in good shape. Now obviously, for an early game player who needs to buy the Malevolence and Negotiator, we won't have all of this get 2 available. We won't have any of it available. So that'll change things until such time as you have those ships purchased and have them where you need to have them. Cuffs, guns, and links. These are 3 of the traditional bottleneck materials, and still something that you have to pay attention to, but they're all solved with the Mark 1 raid tokens. So stun cuffs, we still need 2688 after we apply all the event loot and everything. It's about 50 per week, 59,000 overall. Stun guns, we still need 2,900. It's about 65,000 worth of the Mark 1 raid tokens. And for the comm links, you need about 2,350, so it's about 38,000 of the Mark 1 raid tokens. So we had 418,000 remaining after we bought Carbonite. We're going to subtract off another 162,000 out of the pool and have 256 remaining. So basically, we're just going to solve all 3 of these materials by buying them with the Mark 1 raid tokens and no other places. They're just all going to come out of that shop. Seen our holo projectors? We're going to need those for two reasons. Obviously, we need to gear characters, so we'll need 3720 total for gearing the characters. But if we want to make all of our Aerodium heat sinks, I'm just going to say that we're going to make the Aerodium heat sinks out of this particular material. So we're going to need 4120 more of the Mark III projectors. So that's going to be another 126,000 of the Mark I raid token, and that's going to leave us with 130,000 in the pool. But basically, the holo projectors, we used to farm them pretty heavily off of Lightside 9F. That was a good node that contained bayonets and Mark 8 bio and the projectors. But we just don't have room to farm that node anymore, so pretty much we're going to be farming Cairo all the time, and we'll have to buy these out of the shop. Now, just to make everything clear, you're always going to craft them into a completed piece. You're never going to cash in the parts when you're going to make your Aerodium heat sinks. You need to go down to the bottom, select the completed piece, hit craft, and craft all of these things into completed pieces to get a better exchange rate on them. So if you trade in the individual projector parts, you'll get ripped off. You have to combine them into a completed item to get full value out of this. Okay, these two bios, we do have some issues with the two bios. We got the daily challenges and events and everything. We do still have quite a bit of Mark 8 salvage that we have to buy, and we're just going to buy that with the Mark 1 raid tokens. And oddly enough, we outrun our ability to even do the Mark 8 component. So I have got that scheduled to buy out of the shop as well. That's a pretty good deal out of the shop here. So if you do need a touch-up on the Mark 8 component, it can come from here. It's also material that costs 8 crystals per shard of gear, so you can also just head into the store and buy that for crystals if you have to. But here we're assigning it to be purchased, and that leaves us with 71,000 of the Mark 1 raid tokens left in our pool. Mark 4 back to gel. For the Mark 4 back to gel, we are going to buy it not with Mark 1 raid tokens. The exchange rate on this in the Mark 1 raid tokens is awful. I don't mind buying the gear that costs 16 or 22 per gear piece, but this costs somewhere in the range of 36 or 37. I believe it's 37 per piece. So it's just too expensive to buy it for the Mark 1 raid tokens. And we really don't have any regular energy available to farm it. Again, we've got to stay on the Cairo node all the time. You can buy it for guild tokens, 760 for 20 of these. So we're going to reserve our guild tokens for these purchases and try to make that work just out of that guild shop. You can buy these out of the shard shop, 419 for 5 of them. It's fine to purchase them over there. And last, if we really need to farm them, we can farm them from Fleet 5C. It's a node that also gives some Mark II back to gel, so it's not a horrible node to farm. But that's I would recommend. You have more flexibility with your fleet energy than you do with your regular energy. So if you do need to farm these, farm them off of the fleet node 5C. But this piece of gear, you're going to have to kind of figure it out as you go along. Get as many of them as you can from the raid shop or the guild shop for guild tokens. Buy some, if you have to, from the shard shop, and then farm the rest. This traditional raid gear, the Mark 7 scanners, we definitely will need to take care of those. The Mark 5 droid collars are pretty much self-sufficient over a long timeline. Depending on what characters you're building and where you're at in their gear cycles, you may run out of Mark 5 droid collars. So if you have to buy some of those out of the shop, that's fine. The Mark 7 scanners, we do want to try to buy those out of the squad arena store when we can. There's also a possibility to buy some from the shard shop. And then Mark 1 raid tokens, you can buy these. It's not a bad deal from the shard shop, but we want to avoid it if we can get them somewhere else. But still, we're going to estimate spending about 24,000 overall of the Mark 1 raid tokens to get these Mark 7 scanners or Mark 5 droid collars when we need them. The other 2 parts should be relatively self-sufficient, but again, if you have to touch them up out of the shop, that's okay. Do what you got to do. That leaves us with 47,000 remaining in our Mark 1 pool, and that's going to be the end of the Mark 1 draw, and we're going to leave that 47,000 in order to make purchases for credits, and that'll get us a couple credits purchases every week, more or less about 2 million credits that we're going to be looking for. It's a little shy of that, but again, these are numbers over a long period of time. These pieces, the Fabritech Datapad, the Merson Detonator, and the Mark V Med Pack, these all come out of the shop for 8 crystals per shard of gear. If you run out of these, you can buy them out of the shops, but you can also just make purchases of these here and there for crystals. If you buy one of them every couple weeks, that would be reasonable. If you find yourself buying one or more of these pieces every week, then probably need to look for them in the shops a little more. Buying them with the crystals is the easiest way not to interfere with the other gear priorities. And we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the end and talk about crystals. We'll make more sense how to fit that all in. That leaves a bunch of outlier gear. Mark 10 hollow lenses, for example. Again, you may run out of them. You may be fine. Over a long period of time, I think you're going to have to purchase some of them. Mark 8 Neurosav electro binoculars, we'll have to purchase them from time to time. Mark 6 detonators, Mark 6 droid collars, Mark 9 bio. There's all kinds of this gear that should be more or less okay, but from time to time, you're going to have to dip into the shop to get it. So whether it's the Mark 1 raid tokens or some other shop, I can't statistically predict exactly how many of these pieces you're going to need, but among all of them, you'll need some of them, right? So it is clear that you're going to have to buy some of them. I can't say for sure which ones, but try to buy them out of other shops if you can. Buy them with Mark 1 raid tokens if you have to. All other gear, depending where you're at in the game and what you're farming and what characters you're working on, there can be all kinds of weird gear pieces that become a bottleneck. Mark 6 syringes can become a bottleneck, Mark 4 data pads, Mark 3 detonators, Mark 2 HoloLenses. There's all kinds of those strange little bits of gear. So figuring out every piece for every account for every situation really isn't statistically feasible. So all I can say there is I trust you to figure that out. All right. Moving on to the Gear 13 parts. These are the what I call the epic, the purple Gear 13 parts. Here's a list of all of them, and you can see that all of them in the Shard Shop cost 360 Shard Shop currency per purchase. So these are a key part of what you're looking for. We're going to purchase as many of these as we can through the Shard Shop. We're going to try to get a total of 8 purchases for Shard Shop per day. That's what I've scheduled for this the system that I'm using, and 7 of those purchases are going to be purple or gold 360 cost pieces. That leaves you some Shard Shop currency, 1 purchase a day for Carbonites or Mark 10 HoloLenses or some other gear piece that you really need to buy out of the Shard Shop. But we've got to push this Shard Shop hard. We've got to get a lot of purchases out of there every day. The Mark 8 Nubian, Mark 7 Furnace, and Mark 6 Carbonite should be sustained at the levels they're needed for Relic characters. And as long as you're buying them out of this shop, you should be okay. For the Mark 7 detonators and the Mark 7 Nubians, you won't get enough on the statistical average out of the shop. And these 2 pieces are farmed for regular energy, the light and dark side energy. Remember, all of our light and dark side energy is reserved for Cairo in this model. We cannot afford to be farming the 7 detonators and the 7 Nubians. So we're going to use a Guild Event Token 1 to purchase these. And we're going to reserve our Get 1 in a way where we put these purchases ahead of other purchases. And then we'll use the remainder of the Get 1 for other stuff. But basically, we really want to use the Get 1 here so that we don't ever have to farm these parts and interfere with our regularly scheduled Cairo manufacturing facility. The Mark 6 med pack, Mark 7 syringe, and Mark 8 scanner will all be significantly shorter. They're used in higher quantities, and even with all the purchases you can make out of the shard shop, you won't make what you need to make. And because we're already reserving the Get 1 tokens for other stuff, then we're going to need to actually farm these pieces. We're going to farm the shortfall, and if I manage it among all three of these pieces, it's going to be about 230 energy per day over the entire duration. So therefore, you'll be farming one of these elements about half the time with your fleet energy. So if you have 240 per day, you get 45 for free and 360 from your refreshes. You take away the 230 that we're going to spend on these pieces, gives us 415 fleet energy remaining, and we're going to have to split that between farming the Gear 13 plus gold pieces and farming hard nodes for ships or characters that we need for journeys. So we got to reserve a little bit of the energy for farming up new stuff and use the rest of the energy for the relic cycle. I call these the Gear 13 parts. I've seen them referred to as Gear 13 and Gear 13 Plus, so I'm going to go with that terminology. The Mark 12 gold pieces that are needed for the left-hand side relic parts. That's what we're going to talk about next. And of course, we talked about this already. We're going to get all of those that we can out of the shard shop. The Medpack, multi-tool, bayonet, and armor will need to be supplemented. Some of them. You may find yourself with plenty of multi-tools and really need a lot of armors. It all depends on a lot of random stuff on what you get out of events. But overall, those 4 pieces will need to be supplemented. We're going to get that through Conquest, and we're going to use a few purchases and get 1. And we really shouldn't need to farm any of these pieces ever. We should be able to get them all with shop currencies in one way or another. And again, the model proves itself out in a 6.5 day relic cycle, so it should be sustainable. Again, it may be lacking at some times depending on the characters being taken to relic. If you take a character to relic and it requires 2 sets of bayonets for a character, and then the very next character you try to relic needs bayonets as well, you may find yourself waiting quite some time to restock those bayonets. But just remember, during that time, you're stocking up all your other stuff, and over a long period of time, it works out. So previously, it was efficient to farm the light side 9F node. It had bayonets, Mark 8 bio, the Mark 3 projectors, but we need constant Cairo farming now, and it's much less possible to find the energy for this node. So pretty much we're going to have to deal with the bayonets out of the shop purchases, conquest purchases, things like that. It's still a good node if you get to the point where you're actually caught up on Cairo, or if you're building older characters that don't need as much Cairo. Light side 9F is still a great node to make up a lot of the resources and take the pressure off of other purchases. Next, we're going to look at the Gear 13 parts, and I'm going to call these the 20x2 parts. So when you're building a right side relic, there's a part that you're going to need 50 of. Next to that, there'll be a part where you need 2 times 20. You'll need 2 pieces, and they take 20 each. So these are those 2 times 20 pieces. And these are going to be easy to solve, right? This is the efficient purchase for the Mark II raid tokens. So when you're making a relic, take what you got for free, supplement that with purchases for the Mark II raid tokens. You should never need to farm this stuff anymore. You should be able to get this all for Mark II raid tokens. So among all these different types of gear, we're going to need 2,042. It's 285 to purchase 5, so that's going to burn up 116,000 of our Mark II raid tokens. Remember, we had a total of 352,000 Mark II raid tokens, so here we're burning through 116,000 of them. About a third of everything that we're going to purchase is coming through already. So down to 236,000 of those tokens remaining. Now we're going to look at the Gear 13 parts that are the 50x parts, the ones that you need 50 of for a relic. And these are the second most efficient value to purchase for the Mark II raid token. And when you're building a character, if you need detonators, you're going to want to purchase those with the raid tokens and not farm the detonator, the stun gun, or the data pad. So again, make a difference between the data pad and the keypad. They sound a lot alike, and if you don't pay attention, you might mistake one for the other. But the detonator, the stun gun, and the data pad have relatively poor nodes to farm, so we don't really want to farm those. We want to purchase those. And if we do, it's going to cost us another 84,000 raid tokens. So we take that away, and we still have 152,000 of the Mark II raid tokens left in the pool. So we're doing good. We've solved that problem. For the HoloLens, the keypad, and the furnace, we do want to farm those. For the HoloLens, that node also has Mark VI syringes. And by my calculations, if you don't farm nearly all of the you have to farm about 50% of the total HoloLenses you need. Some you'll get from raids and events and other things. So basically, when you're building a character, if you don't farm most of the HoloLenses that are left to be received, you'll run out of Mark VI syringes. So we want to farm those HoloLenses when we can to make sure we keep up with the Mark VI syringe. For the keypad, it's got a Mark V syringe and a Mark VI lens that both go for BRONZIUM wiring, and a Mark II comlink for Carbonite circuit boards. The furnace has a Mark V scanner and a Mark IV armor that go for BRONZIUM wiring, and a Mark II datapad for Carbonite circuit boards. So you can see we're trying to set up our farming so that with regular energy, we're farming that Aero node because it gives us a lot of BRONZIUM wiring. We're farming the keypads and the furnaces because they give us BRONZIUM wiring. To the extent that really you don't want to farm the detonator, stun gun, or data pad, and you do want to farm especially the furnace and the HoloLens. The keypads, you can purchase those a little bit here and there too, but basically you're going to farm up as many of these as you can. All right, so in farming, we had 415 of the fleet energy available. We're going to spend 230 more energy over the course of this journey that are going to be dedicated to the lens, the furnace, and the keypad. And that leaves 185 fleet energy per day available, which is basically 2 hard farms from fleet. If you need 3 hard farms from fleet, you'll simply have to farm your other hard node, farm a little less of these materials. You'll get a little bit more behind on BRONZIUM wiring. You could see how the whole thing kind of unstacks once you get off base. But yeah, as long as you can maintain 185 fleet energy per day for your hard farms and put the rest into, remember, we're doing 230 here, and then we're doing the rest of it for the purple pieces that we needed. So with the remaining Mark II raid token, it is possible to purchase more Gear 13 Plus parts. So there's still 152,000 remaining, 43% of the total. And instead of continuing to purchase more parts that could help you take other characters to Relic faster, we're instead going to have to spend this currency on materials that make Zinbiddle cards. So again, focusing in on just the purchases and intending to buy those materials and convert them to Zinbiddle cards, we're going to spend that 152,000, and we're going to make 453 Zinbiddle cards. Now we only need 410 Zinbiddle cards in total for this journey. So as long as we are relatively efficient in how we're spending our token too, it's covered, right? So we can cover all of our Zinbiddle cards by using Mark II raid tokens, so we're not going to waste them. First thing we're going to do, we're going to cover all those 2x20 pieces of gear. Once those are all bought, we're going to be able to make some spot purchases for the detonators and those pieces that we don't really want to farm. Then for the rest of them, we're always going to farm those pieces. And if you do make more purchases that Relic characters faster, you'll just get them to Relic faster, and you'll be stuck on BRONZIUM wiring because you won't have the materials to take them up to the appropriate Relic level. So that's a bit the balance here. Just as an alert, We need 3,000 of the furnaces and 2,350 of the HoloLenses. They're needed in a much greater number than any of the other Gear 13 parts. So we're going to constantly have to balance between making the purchases for characters, making purchases for Zinbiddle cards, and farming for these materials that get us BRONZIUM wiring. You do need to be patient on the purchase. Try to maintain a bank. I suggest a 4,000 currency bank in the Mark II tokens so that you can be flexible and work on that. You can't do much more than a 4,000 bank because of the way it works and caps you out. You don't ever want to take a risk that you're going to be even close to capped out. So if you run it down to about 4,000, then you can just really pick and choose the right things to purchase by the time the next raid loot comes in. So if you could be at 4,000 when you get a raid payout, it'll take you up to about 8,000. And then you can spend that out wisely over time. All right, let's move on to Aero magnifiers, impulse detectors, and Electrium conductors. For the Aero magnifiers, people who had access to the C pit before won't find this to be a problem, but we have to make the assumption that some mid-game players won't have Aero magnifiers. And newer players certainly won't have them, so we're going to include all of these as needing to be purchased. That gives us a worst case scenario because it's going to take up 40,000 of our total Mark III raid tokens. So it's 200 arrows that are needed for the selection of characters I've picked, 200 Mark III raid tokens per Aero magnifier, so that eats up the 40k. After purchasing arrows, only 11,000 remains. For those that are far ahead, you're not going to have this problem. You can just use your Mark III raid tokens for a lot of different stuff. Okay, so if we look at the other two, impulse detectors and Electrium conductors, we need 200 impulse detectors and 1,080 Electrium conductors. With only 11,000 of the Mark III raid tokens left, we need to look at purchase efficiency, and we have to carefully figure out how we're going to get these materials, because clearly we're not going to get them with Mark III raid tokens. If we look at buying them for crystals, we could spend 2,300 crystals for 20 Electrium conductors, which makes 115 crystals each. For impulse detectors, it's 1,800, making it 180 each. For arrows, 2,500 for 10, make them 250 each. If we look at the exchange in the Mark III raid tokens and we try to figure out which is the best value in terms of the tokens, you can look at Electrium costs 100 Mark III raid tokens per Electrium, so it's an efficiency of 8.7 Mark III for each crystal. Impulse detectors, 265 Mark III raid tokens each. So it converts pretty badly, and it's 14.7 Mark III per crystal. And for Aero magnifiers, it's 200 Mark III raid tokens each, which converts to 8. That's quite nice. Mark III raid tokens per crystal. We didn't include Zinbiddle cards in here because we do intend to get those all from conversion from gear. But in this case, they do convert at a rate of 8.9. So it's interesting that the impulse detectors are really stand out as kind of the worst deal. And if we just go off of this, buying the impulse detectors is the most effective in terms of conserving our Mark III raid tokens for something more efficient to purchase. So the crystal purchase is more efficient because the Mark III raid token purchase is less efficient. Hope that makes sense. But that's not the only way we could get these pieces of gear. We could also just buy the gear and crunch it up. We could buy a shard shop, get one, and crunch up the gear. So we have to look at kind of every way that we could get these materials and really try to optimize what the best plan is. So if we directly purchase it, it's 115 crystals per Electrium. If we purchase gear and then use that gear to convert to Electrium, it comes out to 161 crystals per Electrium. So it's always better to buy this directly instead of, if you had to buy the gear for crystals, you wouldn't want to do that. If we buy it from the shops, we can use 428 of Guild Event Token 1 for each Electrium that we convert, and 482 Shard Shop currency per Electrium that we convert. The Shard Shop purchases are cheaper, but remember, it's 360 for 4, whereas in Get 1 store, it's 400 for 5. So it's a little bit different on the conversion there. If we look at the same thing for the impulse detectors, 180 crystals per impulse detector. Converting gear is 310 crystals per impulse detector. If we buy it from the shops, 800 in Get 1, 900 in Shard Shop currency. And even though these values are higher, it doesn't necessarily translate until you, again, look at the ratios, right? So if we make the ratio of the Get 1 conversion for Electrium and impulse detectors, you get a 5:35 ratio. And out of the Shard Shop, you get the same 5:35 ratio. Interesting. So if then we look at the crystal purchase ratio, it's 6.3 Electrium conductors to impulse detectors. So by this comparison as well, the better ratio comes out with crystal purchases. So again, it looks like if we're going to convert gear to make materials, again, it's better to buy the impulse detectors for crystals that way. So regardless if we look at it in terms of Mark III raid tokens or other ways to convert, it looks like crystals for impulse detectors is the way to go. So therefore, we're going to buy the 200 impulse detectors straight up. That's going to cost us 36,000 crystals over the 58.5 weeks. It seems like a big number, but it comes out to 615 crystals per week, which is not nearly as scary. We're going to use our Guild Event 1 tokens to make Electrium conductors. But remember, we're reserving our Get 1, so we're buying the Mark 7 detonators and Mark 7 Nubians that we need first, and then we're looking to make purchases toward Electrium conductors. We're going to make purchases from Conquest, and we're going to focus on all the gold Mark 12 gear, so we're going to strip that shop. Remember, you buy all the gear that converts to Electrium, but you also buy all the other gear that may not. What that does is it frees up more purchases. You don't have to use Guild Event tokens or Shard Shop currency to buy as many of the other materials if you've already bought them here out of Conquest. So it's an efficient way to stock up on those gold materials to free up your Shard Shop purchases and Get 1 purchases towards building Electrium conductors. Now remember, the Electrium conductor scavenger, you can give them the gold materials directly for conversion to Electrium conductors. You can also build out an item to completion and convert that. There's no difference. It's not more or less effective, since the purple parts cost 360 out of the Shard Shop, for example, and so do the gold parts. Combining them together is all the same cost gear. But what it does allow you to do, say for instance, you get ahead on a particular material, like let's say you get ahead on the wristwatches, and you can convert some of those to completed pieces just by making the right purchases for the purple gear. You would want to go ahead and convert those to a completed piece, cash them in, and try to stay ahead on Electrium that way. So it's kind of a mix and match thing. What you want to do is buy all of these gold pieces out of the shop, build up a bank, buy everything you can with the Shard Shop currency, and then smartly convert to Electrium. Meanwhile, you want to avoid overstocking on the stuff that converts to impulse detectors, because we don't want to over purchase there, and we want to purchase those directly from the shop when we can. All right, even so, that does leave us short by 290 Electrium conductors by my calculation. Still almost a third of everything that we need. So we're going to have to buy some of those too. We can use up that 11,000 Mark III raid tokens, and that'll buy us another 110 of the Electrium. That leaves us with 180 remaining to purchase, so we can spend another 21,000 crystals over the course of the 58 weeks. And that is 354 crystals per week. That brings our total crystals per week to 969 that we're reserving just to buy impulse detectors and electrium conductors. And again, I realize people may not want to spend the crystals this way, but I said we were going to use every material available for us, and we're going to push this relic cycle as hard as we can. And this is where we end up using the crystals. Now, the income for this account, based on all the stuff that I laid out, was 960 crystals a day. We're spending 750 crystals a day for refreshes, so we do have 1470 extra crystals per week over a long period of time. So that 969 crystals per week fits within the income that we've established in the beginning. So no problem so far, right? We're rocking and rolling. We're still within our 6.5 cycle, still within the resources that we've got as listed as income. All right, let's move on to Chromium Transistors. These used to be, we worked on the Mark 7 weapon mod and the Mark 7 ball armor prototype. And we had to leave Ugnaught and scavenge a bunch of those ball armors and craft them up for most optimized conversion. That's still the case. We can buy these Mark 7 weapon mods out of the guild store, so you can make purchases there directly, and those are completed Mark 7 weapon mods, so they convert directly to Chromium Transistors at a very high rate. You can also buy Mark 7 ball armor for Mark 1 raid tokens. And if you go in there and you buy like 125 of those things, you can then go into this shop, go down to the bottom, click on the completed ball armor mod prototype, and it'll come up with a craft that'll take these three items that you see here with the Mark 1 cuffs, the Mark 2 data pads, and those are armor mods that you bought. And you can craft up a completed ball armor mod prototypes, and that will give you the best conversion on Chromium Transistors. So by my calculation, you'll be able to buy a bunch of the Mark 7 weapon mod, but you will need to make a couple purchases here and there and try to convert these ball armor prototypes. And you will make some other shop purchases of relevant materials that can make Chromium Transistors. This material shouldn't be too much of a problem for you, but there's still that little trick that some people know. Some people don't, but yeah, if you didn't know it before, you know it now, and it still works. And it's still an effective way to gear up, to craft up gear to get the maximum output. All right, so here's our BRONZIUM wiring. Here's our true bottleneck for the 6.5 day relic cycle. So how are we going to manage this? Basically what we've done, what I've tried to sort out, is every way that we can to acquire BRONZIUM wiring. And we're going to focus on that in farming, in shop purchases, everywhere that we can, optimize the amount of BRONZIUM wiring that we're going to get. And still, it's up in the air, right? We made some assumptions, and we did the best that we could to make calculations, but it may or may not be an accurate representation over a long period of time. So basically, there is good news. If your BRONZIUM wiring runs out, you can do two things. One thing you can do is take a character to Relic 0. There's some characters in the game that you want in one of your fill teams. And putting a relic on him, taking him to Relic 0, gives him a bunch of health, a bunch of protection, and 20 speed. Maybe not protection, but it does give him typically health and speed and some other good stats. So even if you don't take him to Relic level 5 or Relic level 1 even, just leave him at Relic 0. You can use up some of those materials, make a character better, give him extra speed, and something like a Mara Jade team, for example, that you're using in Territory Wars or GAC. The character doesn't have to be reliced, but giving her an extra 20 speed would be very useful. And then you just don't use up any BRONZIUM wiring. You just leave it at low relics. The other thing you can do is work on really high level relics. If you take a character from Relic 7 to 8, or from 8 to 9, it does not take BRONZIUM wiring. So once you're out of BRONZIUM wiring completely, you just step back, take that time to build one of your Relic 8 or Relic 9 characters, and you'll restock BRONZIUM wiring. So there's ways to work around this. So for bronzium wiring farming, we're really going to focus on this Cairo shock prod node. We're going to farm it as often as we can. This Mark V data pad is critical to making bronzium wiring, and it's why we want to farm this shock prod node. First of all, we need the shock prods. We need a ton of them. We have to commit a bunch of energy to it every day, but we also get the data pads. That also helps us with building bronzium wiring. Same thing with that Mark 12 furnace, the HoloLens, and the keypad. Those, the furnace and the keypad support bronzium generation, and then the HoloLens supports the Mark 6 syringes. But certainly we're going to try to spend our fleet energy also in a way where we're generating bronzium wiring materials. In terms of bronzium wiring shopping, there's a bunch of little places that we can pick this up from. First of all, we can buy bronzium wiring directly from the Conquest Scavenger. It's not a great bargain. It's not the most efficient purchase, but it's a way to pick up some more bronzium wiring where you can. You can buy the 4 parts for credits in the shop every time. Some of the materials you buy out of there are for bronzium wiring. Not all of them, some of them, but you might as well do that and it helps. You use all your friendship points for bronzium packs. Again, some of the stuff that you open out of those bronzium packs feeds the shard shop, but it also does give you some materials for bronzium wiring. Out of the guild store, you can buy Mark 4 and 5 biotechs, Mark 6 Nubians, and the Mark 5 and 6 weapon mods. Those are the green weapon mods that you can buy from the guild store. And of course, the Mark 7 weapon mod is for the Chromium Transistors anyway, so you'll buy those too. But you can certainly buy a bunch of materials out of the guild store that will convert. In the Squad Arena store, in the bottom slots, there's 4 gear slots. The very first gear slot that shows up usually has stuff for bronzium wiring or carbonite circuit boards. The other 3 you have to kind of look at and figure out if they're in there. A lot of times there's not a whole lot of purple gear that goes for bronzium wiring, so you got to be careful with that. But certainly there's some stuff you can purchase from the squad store. And then in the guild event store, if you go all the way down the last purchasable square before you get to characters, has Mark V data pads show up also there for 90 guild event token 1 for 5 data pads. And we pretty much want to buy that every single time that material is in the shop. It's that important for bronzium wiring. So we're even going to spend guild event tokens on it. But we're going to buy everything we can for bronzium wiring. We're going to farm everything we can for bronzium wiring. And we should be able to keep up just barely. If you go through a cycle in your account where you're building a bunch of Relic 5 and Relic 7 back to back, you will run out of bronzium wiring. If you build a Relic 3 and then a Relic 7 and then go back to building a Relic 3, you'll keep up. But if you've got a part in the cycle where you do a bunch of 5s and 7s in that range back to back, it'll eat up your bronzium wiring in a hurry and you'll be out. Just be aware that if you solve the bronzium wiring bottleneck, though, it doesn't help as much as you think. So let's say we could theoretically buy an extra 100 bronzium wiring just for crystals or cash every week and solve this bottleneck and have it not be a problem. The bottleneck just moves to Cairo then. It moves to signal data. Remember, we're already literally at the limit for signal data. So as soon as bronzium wiring isn't your bottleneck, signal data still is. So you would have to accelerate Cairo-Tex, all types of signal data, and bronzium wiring simultaneously in order for anything to go faster. Now, most people will realize I described the weekly relic pack that you can buy, and that is a way to take the pressure off of other materials or to make it go faster if you're willing to spend money. On the other hand, if you do run out of bronzium wiring, it's not that bad. You know, if you run out of bronzium wiring, let it happen. It's okay. You don't need to go crazy and try to figure out some way to farm a node with garbage on it that gets you the most bronzium wiring. You need to just farm the Cairo node because it gives you Cairo and bronzium wiring. And during the time that you're letting your bronzium wiring restock, it does free up the Mark 1 raid tokens to buy more credits or other stuff. It allows more purchases for the conversion of Electrium wiring and impulse detectors, and takes the pressure off the materials that you have to spend crystals on. So if you can't maintain a 6.5-day relic cycle forever, it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. You can relax a little bit and take the pressure off of some of these other ones, and then let the BRONZIUM wiring catch up. For players with a higher economy, let's say you're scoring really high in the crate with massive personal contribution, BRONZIUM wiring is still going to be your bottleneck, and it's going to prevent you from going much faster. Sure, you'll be able to cover all your Electrium and impulse detectors and Aero magnifiers, and that stuff's all taken care of. But the BRONZIUM wiring is still going to be the bottleneck. The signal data is still going to be the bottleneck unless you're willing to spend cash or crystals to buy them, or start spending 200 crystals per refresh to get signal data. You've pretty much reached your limit. Now, in that scenario, because you've got your higher level relic materials managed, people with those types of accounts will find they need to just pause on making more new relic characters and take their relic 8 or relic 9 characters up higher and go up instead of out. So I did a calculation. If you suspend your other activities in the game for relic making and you just focus on getting the relic materials for relic 8, it'll take about a 4-day cycle to go from relic 7 to relic 8 in a character, and it'll take about 11 days. So it takes 4 days for the relic 8, and it takes another 7 days on top of that, 11 days total, to take a character from relic 7 to relic 9. Assuming that you have the droid brains to be able to do that, or have purchased the droid brains to be able to do the relic 9s. But in any case, in that period of time, if you take 11 days out of your cycles to make a relic 9 character, in those 11 days, you catch up on your BRONZIUM wiring. You can go back to your relic cycles for another, 5, 6, 7 relic cycles, and then you'll be out of BRONZIUM wiring again, and you can again go back to these higher relic cycles. So it's not a bad thing, and I think the moral of the story is just let the BRONZIUM wiring be your bottleneck, and be aware that if you really want to spend to break that as a bottleneck, you're just going to create a shortage somewhere else. So do that with care. Carbonite circuit boards, also kind of a pain in the butt material. And over the long haul, I calculate that the Carbonite circuit boards will not be sustained. It's hard to calculate with those little pieces of gear that you're getting from all the hard nodes you're farming, from other nodes, the Cairo node, everything. It's hard. But at the end of the day, there is a 500 crystal pack that comes up about once a month. I don't know during the whole duration of this video being present on the internet, maybe that pack will go away. But as of right now, you can buy that once a month. I think it's a minimum of 100 Carbonite circuit boards. If you buy that once or twice, it should be enough to ensure that your Carbonite circuit boards stay on track. So another use of crystals. All right, this is the point where we take an intermission. So we've gone through the method. We've established a big pool of characters and gear. We've gone through the gear bit by bit and figured out where we're going to get all this stuff out of the shops, out of the, everything. And now we have to prove that it's going to fit together. So we got to go back through it shop by shop, talk about what we're going to do, how we're going to spend our currency, and make it all fit that way. And at the end of the day, I think both of these things are necessary, at least for me. I want to understand why I selected the various gear pieces resourced from each shop or whatever. I also want to understand what I'm doing with each shop so I know how to make my purchases. All right, let's get into it. In the featured shipments, buy all 4 gear pieces for credits. In the weekly shipments, this is where you're occasionally going to buy your impulse detectors, Electrium conductors. Typically, you'll go to a character that needs them, and you'll hit find, and you'll just find them and purchase them that way. You won't actually go through the shop, but they're typically in these weekly shipments. Cantina store. We're going to buy Cassian's U-Wing and feed the shard shop at the max rate. For anybody who doesn't have Cassian's U-Wing, just do it. Get it. All the other purchases in the game, you spend 400 of a currency type and you get 4 ship shards, and it converts to 152 currency. That's nice. Cassian's U-Wing from the Cantina store, you get a 5th shard, and it takes it up to something like 196 shard shop currency or something like that. So it's really a big deal. It's a big jump. That 5th shard is really worth a lot. So it's in your best interest to get Cassian's U-Wing up and running. I've never had a problem spending all of my generated Cantina currency. I can usually make 2 purchases a day with what I farm out of the Cantina store. More or less, I never have an issue. I just always buy Cassian's U-Wing and convert that to shard shop currency. That's all I ever do. Now, obviously, for new players, Cantina store currency is going to be needed to build characters. And before you have Cassian's U-Wing maxed out, you can also, if you need the shard shop currency, you can just buy more of a character that you already have. It's a worse conversion. It's only 150 shard shop currency for a character. But, you can make that work until you get Cassian's U-Wing maxed out. But again, if you're a mid-game player and you've never had a reason to build Cassian's U-Wing, build it just for this. Just because it has such a good conversion rate. Now we'll talk about the guild activity, guild token. I put a picture here of what that looks like just to make sure we're all on the same page and we know what we're talking about. So we're going to try to build a bank of at least 2,000 of these tokens. We're going to focus on the 100 and 150 cost pieces. Remember, we want the Mark 4 and 5 Bio, Mark 6 Nubian, green weapon mods for the BRONZIUM wiring. We want the Mark 7 weapon mod for Chromium Transistors. And we want the Mark 3 detonators. For whatever reason, the Mark 3 detonators that you buy are completed items. And it's really a big deal because those could really be painful if you don't buy them out of the guild shop here. So you got to make sure you always stay solvent on your Mark 3 detonators and never have to farm any of that material. And you want to free up the materials that you use to make the detonators, the components. Those need to be freed up for BRONZIUM wiring and Carbonite circuit board. So we're going to buy those materials for conversion. Then as a second priority, we're going to buy Mark 4 Bactigel. Then as long as we have a bank that's over 2,000 and there's nothing else that we need, then we're going to buy miscellaneous pieces. And that could include Carbontes out of the shop, for example. We do have to pick up 30 Carbontes a week somewhere. So probably picking up one purchase of 10 or 20 of these in a week out of the guild tokens would make sense. For the Mark 1 raid tokens, we pulled a lot of that stuff together, and basically it comes down to this. We're going to need a bunch of these Mark 3 projectors, about 140 of them a week. So we're going to have to buy a bunch of these. And you may not need that many. You guys will be able to play it by feel, buy a lot of them, convert a whole bunch of them to Aerodium heat sinks. And when you're out of Aerodium heat sinks, then you know you got to go buy a bunch more of them. But yeah, over a long period of time, you're going to have to buy a lot of them out of the Mark 1 raid tokens. You're going to make one purchase of 125 Carbontes per week, or multiple purchases. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's a guideline, right? You're going to have to pick up Carbontes. And then you're going to have to do about 150 total among stun cuffs, stun guns, and comlinks. Comlinks cost 16, cuffs and guns cost 22 each. So, mix and match what you need, buy them out of this shop. Then you're going to have 2 purchases of credits per week. You're going to buy 2 million credits per week out of the shop. And when I calculated credits, we were okay on credits. We had plenty of credits to build characters and to work on mods, as long as we only built the characters that were in the journey. Now remember, it takes an insane amount of money to build one character. Building a character takes 9 million credits. It'll take almost 2 million to take their stars up. Remember, you got 1 million to take them to 7 stars, 500 to 6 stars, 250, And if you add up all the credits that you spend taking your character to 7 stars, it's almost 2 million credits just to get their stars to 7. It's 6.3 million credits to take them up to level 85. And then it's almost 700,000 to put all their skills on, depending on what skills they have and how many. So by the time you do all of those things, build a character out to 7 stars, take them to 85, put their skills on, and put your first set of mods on them, you're looking at easily 9 million per character. So if you're building characters that aren't part of your journey, that 9 million is going to come on top of what I've already scheduled for. So you'll very quickly run out of money, and you'll say, Loquitur, I need to make 10 purchases a week out of the shop. I can't live unless I make at least 10 purchases. Trust me, you're fine unless you're building characters. Building characters absolutely destroys your economy, takes away all your money. So what I've done, I build 1 character per week to level 85. And if I do that slowly over time, each week build 1 character, I don't have much problem. I can get 20 million credits in a week. I can build 1 character. I can farm, work my mods, and it's solvent. The count stays balanced, and I don't need that many credit purchases. So again, you can keep your credit purchases small, but if you start building a whole bunch of characters that aren't in your journeys that you've picked, you will run out of credits instantaneously, and you'll be sad. All right, Mark 8 bio, both parts of the Mark 8 bio we need to buy a little bit. We need to buy raid gear, some Mark 7 scanners, potentially some Mark 5 droid callers, and then other gear as needed. So that's your priority, right? Every week, and maybe even every raid, just think of that. Buy some projectors, buy some Carbonites, buy whatever you're shortest on among stun cuffs, guns, comlinks, and then use the rest of it to buy credits and balance out the rest of the gear types that you need. And all kinds of wild card stuff. Just use this shop to fill the gaps. The Mark II raid tokens. First thing we're going to prioritize is these 20 by 2 pieces. So the right side relic pieces where you need 20 pieces twice, we're going to buy all of those out of the shop. We're going to prioritize that. It's the most efficient purchase for this type of currency, and we just don't want to have to farm them ever. The remaining currency should be spent on making Zinbiddle cards. Once you have Zinbiddle cards in the bank, then you buy the remaining pieces that you need. Remember, the detonators and stuff like that we're going to buy. And just as a reminder, we're going to farm all of the lenses, the furnaces, and the keypads that we can. And then the last thing, right? So first we're going to buy the 2x20s. Then we're going to stock Zinbiddle cards. Then we're going to buy the 50x pieces that we don't want to farm when we have a bank, and I put the bank at 4K. Just saying that 4K is, you can't keep too much of a bank on this thing. If you run it down to 0 every time, that's fine too. I mean, as long as you're only buying the parts that cost $285 or $335 for 5, you're fine. You're fine. Just don't buy the purple parts because the price jumps way up and they're inefficient to buy. The Gear 12 stuff and the Gear 12 purples are bad exchange rate. Mark 3 raid tokens, we're going to buy Aero magnifiers as the first priority. If you have Aero magnifiers taken care of, then you're going to buy Electrium if you're okay on arrows. If you're okay on Aero magnifiers and also you're okay on Electrium, then you buy impulse detectors. Zinbiddle should be your last resort, as we're going to use our Mark II raid tokens to buy gear and build them that way. In the Squad Arena store, we're going to buy all the parts that can be used for BRONZIUM wiring as a priority. Mark 7 scanners also appear in the Squad Arena store, and we can buy those. Just remember, if you have to buy prestige when it's needed for a capital ship, that does reduce the purchases and can slow the relic cycle. If all you're buying is prestige and you're not working on the BRONZIUM wiring parts, I would say if you're working on prestige, just focus on don't buy anything for Carbonite circuit boards, don't buy the Mark 7 scanners. Only buy parts that you know go for BRONZIUM wiring and the prestige. And you do need to split that up a little bit and still make the BRONZIUM wiring purchases even when you're buying prestige. It means some of your capital ships may have to wait on some skills. Would you rather be waiting on skills on a capital ship or execute the skills on a capital ship and have every character in your account hung up on BRONZIUM wiring? That's a bit your choice. You could do what you like. But for me, I would say be smart with how you spend your prestige and build it up slowly over time. Galactic War Store, we're just going to buy ships and feed the shard shop. Obviously, early game players will be buying characters and ships, and it's going to significantly reduce the shard shop currency and increase your timing on your relic cycles. Mod Store, don't buy mods unless you've got over 50,000 credits or over 25,000 shipbuilding materials. Really keep a big bank. I said K credits, I meant million. So only if you've got a really big bank, enough saved up that you can afford to buy these mods. Basically, we're not going to buy them. Now, for endgame players who are done building characters, because of this 9 million per character, when you don't have to build characters anymore, there's nothing else to do with those credits, right? So once you're in the end game, feel free to buy mods with your credits because there's not something else to do with them. Then I feel the other way around about it, right? If you've got a bank of 340 million credits and you're not buying mods, then you're missing a whole bunch of opportunities to buy mods, right? You don't need 340 million credits. You could go ahead and convert those to mods. So again, depends on where you're at in the game. In the Fleet Arena store, in this particular optimized cycle, we are buying ships and feeding the shard shop. Constantly feeding the shard shop to get the most purchases possible. With the faster relic cycles, we're going to outrun our Zeta materials anyway, and buying them out of this shop is a choice. And you can pick between trying to catch up or keep up on Zeta materials or converting to shard shop currency to relic things faster. And that may change depending on where you're at and who you're trying to Zeta. So make a balance between those two things. With the Guild Event Token 3, we're just going to buy Cairo computers for now. For Guild Event Token 2, we're going to make 2 or 3 purchases per week of injectors. And again, it's going to be the relevant injectors, the cell and the handle, and we're going to avoid the head, I think. Yeah, it was earlier in the video. You go back and look at it. But yeah, we're going to make 2 or 3 purchases per week of those injectors with Get To. And we're going to buy some Cairo computers here when we need to. Early game players are going to still need to build a Malevolence or Negotiator. Just because this makes your relic cycle go faster and you don't have to farm your injector handles doesn't mean you get to skip Negotiator Malevolence. Pay the taxes, get those ships before you move on to using your Get To for relics. It's a toll. It's an early game player toll. You got to build these 2 ships. You got to at least unlock them at 5 stars. They're way too good not to have them. Having more relic characters, in this case, having those ships, especially if you like Grand Arena or Territory Wars, having these ships is more important than having a bunch more relic characters. Now, if you hate Grand Arena and you don't care, then feel free to go ahead and skip those ships and spend it on what you like. Guild Event Token 1. We're going to try to bank here. We're going to try to get a bank around 4,000. We're going to purchase those Mark V data pads whenever they show up. Again, those are for BRONZIUM wiring. They cost 90 for 5. Trinket cost, right? So we're going to buy them when they show up. We're always going to keep a bank so we can always be buying those. We're going to purchase the Mark 7 detonators, Mark 7 Nubians. Those are the purple pieces that we need that have to be farmed with regular energy. We don't want to do that. We want to make purchases here. And then the rest of our Get One we're going to use to convert to Electrium. We're going to focus on things that we can make Electrium conductors out of. Grand Arena tokens, we're going to pretty much reserve those for Cairo computers. In the Shard Shop, we're going to buy the Gear 13 purple and gold as a priority, all those 360 cost pieces. Generating Shard Shop currency accelerates more as you get more 7-star characters. Obviously, newer players are going to struggle with this. The further you are into the game, the more characters you have at 7 stars. Everything goes into the Shard Shop, and it's a cycle that kind of snowballs. And of course, once you get most of the characters at 7 stars, you kind of top out, and that's it. But again, BRONZIUM, converting your friendship points to BRONZIUM packs and getting everything you can out of the shard shop is important. All right, you want to push at least 8 purchases per day, possibly even 9. And you only want to make maybe one of those purchases on something that isn't these 360 cost pieces. You want to buy some Mark 10 HoloLenses out of here, for example. You do need to pick up 1 or 2 purchases of Carbonite somewhere throughout the week. Again, we need to get 30 Carbonites somewhere. So what we need to be pushing this shard shop as hard as we can. Galactic War Store, Cantina, when you do your Galactic Wars daily, the character shards out of there need to be getting into the shard shop eventually. So all that stuff. In the Conquest store, I typically don't buy anything out of the Conquest store. I wait for Conquest to be on, and I buy from the Wandering Scavengers. We're going to get all the signal data we can out of here because why not? It helps. We're going to get BRONZIUM wiring. Again, it's not a great deal, but we can buy it and it helps. Then we're going to buy all the Gear 13 gold parts that we can. Again, either to make the Electrium conductors or to free up other purchases to focus on the Electrium conductors. And if anything is left over, we can actually buy Electrium wiring directly. They usually have some purchases somewhere in there. It's like $10.50 for 10 Electrium wiring. It's quite expensive in terms of a Conquest purchase, but it does prevent you from having to spend those crystals if you have the Conquest currency to spend. With regular energy, we're going to do 3 or 4 hard farms, and then everything else goes to Cairo. Originally, because I had 2 dark side GLs in here, I kind of had a break cycle in there. And then I thought about it and I realized that when you absolutely have to farm the dark side GLs, then you just switch to farming the Cairo computer node because it's a dark side node, and then you can purchase the shock prods. It's not as nice, right, because the shock prod node has all that BRONZIUM wiring that we're going to have to skip. But if we just farm the Cairo computer node when we're doing dark side GL tokens or alts, then we stick within our cycle. We keep hammering away at the 6.5 day relic cycle, even while we're building Galactic Legends. Of course, in the early game, we do need to farm more hard nodes. There's just no way around it. You can't do 3 hard nodes if you're in your first year of play. You need too many characters. All the journeys are going to need a bunch of characters that you don't have, right? So you got to farm them. And that means you need to farm like 5 or 6 hard nodes between your characters and your ships. And it'll slow things down, but eventually you'll get to the point where you can do like 3 hard farms and the rest on Cairo. Cantina energy, again, this is pretty much one of our limiting factors, right? We have to spend 36% on fragmented, 40% on incomplete, 23% of all the Cantina energy we spend goes to flawed, and then 11% is for farming characters. And this is supplemented. It doesn't include the purchases that I've made, of course, for Conquest. Or I should say, these rates assume that we are going to make those Conquest purchases. Every little bit helps. If you don't get 3 refreshes every day, then this is going to be your limiting factor. Mod energy, we haven't talked about it, but you know what? Farm your mods. For my Loquitur account, my mid-game account, it's 5 days I farm mods and 2 days I farm slicing materials. That's been a pretty good ratio. Sometimes I need a few more slicing materials, so maybe a 4-to-3 ratio is better. Adjust to your own method. In fleet energy, we're going to farm the Gear 13 epics. Those purples are going to take about 35% of the amount of energy that we spend. Farming Gear 13 for Zinbiddle cards is going to be, when I say Gear 13 for characters, it's either to build the relic for a character or to convert to Zinbiddle cards. We're going to focus, remember, on the furnace. We're going to farm the furnaces whenever we need them. We're going to farm the HoloLens and the keypad. And we're going to spend about 30% of our energy there. And then that reserves about 35% of our fleet energy for hard nodes that we need to farm up for ships or characters. Conquest energy, 10 refreshes per week in hard mode. Crystals. So we have 750 for 3 refreshes of each energy type. So 450 for all the energy types, and then 300 for Cantina. Our income off of this strategy was 960 per day. So if we add up all of the crystals that we're going to spend, 750 on energy refreshes each day, 969 each week for impulse detectors and Electrium conductors, 500 per month for a Carbonite circuit board pack from the shop, and then 1,000 per month on Conquest refreshes. That gives us, if we look at the 960 minus the 750, gives us 210 crystals above our refresh commitment. So it's about 6,300 extra crystals total per month. Then we look at the 1,500 and that 969 every week for 4 weeks. Gives us 5,376 committed crystals per month. And that leaves you about 1,000 crystals left over for purchasing those 8 crystals per gear piece, or for other refreshes in Conquest, or whatever you want to do with them, right? Or it gives you a couple days where you don't make as good a placement in Fleet Arena, and you don't have to be sad. So you got some wiggle room on the crystals. All right, so as we wrap up here, a couple disclaimers before I make my conclusions. I did start to try to figure out for the characters that I was building their hard nodes, what gear I would get off the hard nodes, how that gear would translate to scavenged materials. It was too much. I gave that up. I really didn't have the heart to go through in that level of detail. So the moral of the story is the hard nodes are not calculated into the gear pool. And a lot of the hard nodes do contain gear, especially stuff that's using the Mark I raid tokens, right? So Carbontes, stun cuffs, stun guns, comlinks, things like that are going to come off these hard nodes. And that's going to free up some of that Mark I currency for more credit purchases or other purchases that you need. But I couldn't calculate in that level of detail. I didn't have the willpower to do it. New players will take probably 3 to 4 weeks for their first relic. You don't have any of your characters filled. You don't have shard shop currency flowing at a good rate. You're still focused on building characters to 7 stars. So your currency is just tied up in trying to start to build the account. So don't be surprised if, trying to relic Darth Vader or a snowtrooper or something like that at first, if it takes you quite some time. You're looking at this 6.5 days. Man, I'm supposed to be able to build a relic in a week, and it took me 4 weeks. Yeah, it's going to take you 4 weeks if it's your first relic. Then you'll settle in after a while, and midway through your first year, your average is probably going to be somewhere around 8 to 10 days. And again, that's just because you still have to build more characters out of the cantina. You still have to spend more of your other resources building characters, and all your characters aren't going to be 7 stars yet, even still. Maybe you still have to farm more hard nodes, 4 or 5 hard nodes a day, laying off on the Kairos. So it's a snowball that has to build. Once you're in your second year of account building, you can get closer to the 6.5. And if you've been playing for 2 years or more, you should definitely be able to achieve the cycle that we're talking about here. If you're an endgame player, if you've got a really high contribution and your guild's doing well in the crate raid, you'll exceed all this stuff. So conclusion, to maximize the speed of the relic cycle, it's dependent mostly on how we use the shard shop, using that guild event token 1, and managing how we get those Electrium conductors, and how we use all of those different raid tokens. For a lot of mid-game players who already have arrows, it's easier than everything I've said. If you don't have to spend that 40k on Aerotechs, Aero magnifiers, you can spend them instead on Electrium conductors or impulse detectors as needed. Save a lot of crystals. Spenders can buy that weekly relic pack to take the pressure off of resources. You won't have a significantly improved relic speed, but you could probably get it down to knock another half a day off, get it down to about 6 days or maybe even less, depending on how everything shakes out. When building characters out of the cantina, signal data becomes a bottleneck. So there will be a period of time if you have to build a character where you'll take a hit on your signal data stream, and there will be a moment where you might have to take a little bit of a break and leave some characters at lower level and catch back up on the signal data later. If you can't or won't use crystals for salvage pieces, like the part where I'm telling you to buy the impulse detectors and you say, nope, this is not going to do that, not going to spend crystals on impulse detectors, it really extends the sustainable cycle. It takes the sustainable cycle all the way out to 8.8 days because we just can't get those salvage pieces at the right rate to make the Zinbiddle cards, the Electrium conductors, and the impulse detectors for higher relics. So I was shocked when I said, okay, we're not going to... I kind of messed around a little bit with it and said, okay, if we didn't buy any of those, what would it look like? And we really either A, have to have the Aero magnifiers under control and be able to make those purchases with token 3, or we really have to spend our crystals on those salvaged materials. Zetas are going to be a careful choice. With characters getting to relic faster, you're going to build a lot of good teams to a higher level, faster than your Zetas can keep up. Even if you purchase Zetas out of fleet, I don't think you'll keep up. So in the future, there may be a lot more picking and choosing exactly which Zetas go on which teams. You won't be able to have everything. That also goes for mods as well. With the relic cycles going faster, it's going to be harder and harder to keep up with as many mods as you need. So some characters will have to accept lower quality mods. Again, it's just a symptom of the faster relic cycles. You can also take characters to Gear 13, leave them at Relic 0, give them that extra 20 speed, and just leave them there. That doesn't burn up your BRONZIUM wiring or other resources. You can also use some time taking characters to Relic 8 or Relic 9 beyond the journey requirements. So let's say, for instance, you have to build up General Skywalker to Relic 7. Maybe you want to take him to Relic 8. Jedi Knight Luke, you build him up to Relic 7. Maybe you want to take him to Relic 8. Dark Trooper, if you have him at Relic 7, you might want to take him to Relic 8. So there's characters like that that gives you a little bit of a break from the BRONZIUM wiring as your bottleneck. Conclusion that I can't state strongly enough: if you spend in this way, if you kind of focus your account like we talked about, there's still going to be times where certain gears are going to become a bottleneck. And don't go crazy. Don't spend a whole bunch of money trying to fix it. Don't feel like you did something wrong and it's broken. Be patient. Let the game come to you. Let the next raid token come in, and spend that on the appropriate gear to fix your bottleneck, and just work through it. Focus your spending in the right way. Don't rush it. The harder you rush, the more you're likely to misspend your currencies. ABFK, always be farming Cairo. The moral of the story is, unless you're just hitting that Cairo note every day, you're not going to get the BRONZIUM wiring, and you're not going to get the Cairo to make these cycles go as fast as they can. You do have to split your Mark II raid tokens and your fleet energy spending. You have to split those between making your characters relic and getting the salvage for Zinbiddle cards. And it's about 50-50 overall, right? You have to spend about half your energy and raid tokens helping build characters to relic, and about half of it just making Zinbiddle cards. Use energy and shop purchases strictly with BRONZIUM wiring in mind. Focus so hard on BRONZIUM wiring. So those are the conclusions. I'm sure I missed some things. There's always interesting information generated by the community. People will see stuff that I missed. Be sure you leave any questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms in the comments down below. Let's work together as a community to make this better, stronger, faster, and see what we can do. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next Holocron.